Let's say Invincible's planet Viltrum existed in Dragon Ball. Could Frieza take over the planet? And if so, what would happen with Viltrum under his control? Could they eventually have an uprising, or are they doomed to be his warriors forever? The answer might sound obvious, but it's more complicated than you think. This video will work twofold. It will be part power scaling, but also part what if. We want to see how strong the Viltrumites are, and if they could fend off this invasion, and what would follow after that. But also, how would they operate under Frieza's rule, if they are taken over? To start, Viltrum has 50 remaining members at the start of Invincible. So the big question for this hypothetical is, what time frame are we using? We're going to use the population of the 50 strongest. Considering Frieza's a businessman and an opportunist, this would be the best time to strike. It makes it easier to take over and makes the Viltrumites easier to control. Just like the Saiyans, he wanted them all dead, but he won't mind a few in his army. This will be pre-Invincible Viltrum and a pre-Saiyan Saga Frieza force. We're also going to exclude Mark here, so I guess we could use a time where Nolan hasn't gone to Earth yet and become Omni-Man, or had a kid. But Nolan will be a part of this group. First off, how strong are the Viltrumites? Well, these remaining 50 are the strongest, but some are stronger than others. We don't need to scale each of them in depth, and some of them can't even be scaled as accurately because they have less feats. Though I think the common consensus is that all the remaining Viltrumites fall in the small planetary range, just on varying ends of it. It's pretty easy to come to that conclusion because, well, we have a feat of 3 of them destroying a planet that's around Earth's size, after it had been destabilized. Mark, Nolan, and Thetis. So, it wouldn't make them fully planetary, but just below that. Of course, that's ignoring the sun disk stuff here for the sake of simplicity and because of how contentious that is. That's a whole other can of worms, so we're gonna stick with the usual scaling for this hypothetical. I previously made a video about 50 average Saiyans versus 50 average Viltrumites. I recommend checking that video out too, because it'll give more context here, but in that video I also discussed how the speeds of the Viltrumites work. They're obviously massively faster than light, however, they can't accelerate to that instantly. But their combat and reaction speeds do scale to wherever their travel speeds go to. And like I mentioned, these 50 Viltrumites are the peak of the peak, so they're even faster than those ones I mentioned. Now we have an idea about the Viltrumites, but what about Frieza's army? How strong is the Frieza force? Frieza's soldiers have a wide variance of powers, and it doesn't really have a specific number of soldiers, though it is at least in the hundreds, if not thousands by this point. Unfortunately, we're going to have to get into power levels here, which are nice for quick power comparisons within Dragon Ball, but converting them to actual power scaling kinda sucks because they're not linear and they don't capture the full picture of someone's power. That kinda was the whole intent when Toriyama made them. It even gets made fun of in the story itself. Anyways, the average Frieza soldier likely caps out at Raditz's power level, so we could say the grunts, the random nameless soldiers on Namek were around 1500. And considering how important the mission on Namek was, Frieza brought what were considered good soldiers. So for the sake of this video, let's assume that the average weaker soldier is probably around the level of 900, which is pretty much Goku's peak individual power against Raditz when he was using a Kamehameha, so we could scale it right off of him. By the way, we're going to work on Dragon Ball manga scaling here, rather than anime stuff. Raditz Saga Goku is planetary level himself, arguably even higher than that because Dragon Ball's Earth is actually bigger than a normal planet. But I digress, let's just keep it simple and say planetary. As for speed, Goku's only about relativistic in combat speed here, and reaction speed as well. With some pretty slow travel speed too. Dragon Ball characters at this point were only about supersonic tier when actually flying, but the reaction and combat speeds are more important here. So all of this applies to the average run-of-the-mill Frieza Force soldier. But the Frieza Force obviously has a couple higher ranking soldiers too. Of course, there are the 3 Saiyans, Raditz, Nappa, and Vegeta, who are 1500, 4000, and 18,000 respectively for their power levels, though the former two do vary sometimes. Vegeta on the other hand is solid at 18,000, and that is a pretty definite power level. These 3 could also turn into Great Apes and multiply their power tenfold. There are also soldiers like Apul who fight warrior Namekians, so his power's in the couple thousand since the Namekian warriors have powers of 3,000 as well. A few members like him exist, some are even of the same race, but I'd only assume a handful of warriors are in this range. Then there are people like Kui, who's also at 18,000, and it's safe to assume that a few like him exist, but probably single digits if anything. He and Vegeta were pretty exceptional. And there's also Frieza's right-hand men, Zarbon and Dodoria, the strongest of them at 23,000 and 22,000 respectively. Finally, Frieza himself, though he rarely does the dirty work, 530,000 in his first form, up to 150 million full power, a huge range. Now, everybody else I just listed is just varying levels of large planetary. Again, power levels aren't linear, so differences in power levels aren't exactly multiplicative. Though, as for Frieza himself, he's obviously way beyond that level. First form Frieza is a small star buster, while at full power, he buffs all the way up to large star level. Thankfully, unlike Invincible power scaling, I feel like a lot of people easily agree on where all these characters fall in terms of their destructive capabilities. The higher echelon of Frieza Force soldiers are faster than light, but not by a significant margin like the Viltrumites. Though, once you get to Frieza himself, he does go into the massively faster than light territory. Probably still not on the level of the Viltrumites, but still incredibly quick. Raditz and Goku on their own are at least planetary, so that sets a solid floor. This means Raditz, one of the weakest among the named Frieza Force soldiers, is stronger than the best Viltrumites. And the average schmucks that are part of the army and don't even have names are probably still stronger than the Viltrumites, at least when it comes to attack power and durability. But in case you haven't already noticed, there's a pretty huge caveat: speed. Dragon Ball doesn't get into that massively faster than light territory until later on. Well, besides Frieza, he is in that realm. Granted, the Viltrumites also do need to accelerate to get there, and they usually won't fight at these speeds on a planet because, first of all, it's easier to fly in the vacuum of space, and second of all, at least in Mark's case, you're going to be damaging stuff around you and you don't want to do that. And I doubt they'd want to fight at their fullest speed on planet Viltrum because they would be destroying their own home. But, even with this speed advantage, what is speed going to do when everyone else outclasses your strength? Sure, against the weaker Frieza Force soldiers, it could make up for the gaps. But like, even when you're getting to Raditz level, the gap between him and the average Viltrumite is going to be so large that you can't simply make it up by being really fast and speed blitzing. Unless you catch the soldiers off guard, but knowing that they're basically invading a planet full of knockoff Saiyans, they're probably going to be careful. Not to mention, while a lot of the weaker Frieza Force soldiers don't have unique abilities, the stronger ones are shooting Ki Blast, and some of them even have other techniques, so they have a lot at their disposal. They have more versatile skill sets, and this isn't even considering that Frieza could call in the Ginyu Force. I just don't think they'd be necessary here. I think just with his regular soldiers, particularly a couple strong ones like the Saiyans and maybe like Kui, Zarbon, and Dodoria, this planet would be a little bit tougher to take over than normal, but Frieza wouldn't suffer any major losses and he would win in the end. Even with the gap in speed, I don't see any way for the Viltrumites to win. But they're not going to be killed either. The whole point of Frieza taking the planet over is, first of all, to keep the planet for himself. He's not going to destroy it. I feel like the planet would be somewhat valuable so he could flip it and sell it. Or just keep the Viltrumites on it like he did with Planet Vegeta, and keep them essentially as soldiers. But that's where we get into the next part of this video, the what if section. What would happen next? Well, that's where things get interesting. It's not just as straightforward as the Viltrumites become soldiers and that's it. There's a lot of variables to consider. Naturally, Frieza would probably want to use them as soldiers. Of course, if he wanted to kill them, he could do so. If we frame this as a deathmatch, the Frieza Force very clearly wins and kills all the Viltrumites. Frieza could do this alone with barely any effort. Just a couple Ki Blasts from Frieza and boom, he's done. The Viltrumites are similar to Saiyans and love to fight anyways. Plus, he can control them due to having stronger soldiers already, and he would be offering them work. For now, they'd probably acquiesce for their survival, and also because this isn't exactly a bad deal for them. They're going to be part of a larger army, get better protection. They're going to be getting paid to fight. So it's not really a terrible predicament, but it will be a huge blow to their pride. And of course, they're not going to get complacent and be Frieza's minions forever. Long term, they'd plan to take over, or rebel somehow, and it might be possible. By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to drop a like and hype points on the video because it really does help out the channel. And I make videos like this a lot, so if you want to see more, well, that's why the subscribe feature's there. Either way, I appreciate you watching. So what happens when they're assimilated into the Frieza Force? First off, they would get introduced to Frieza's tech. While the Viltrumites had their own advanced tech, this would maybe cause some other developments. Scouters are very helpful, for example, as well as healing pods. Viltrumites can already heal themselves, but imagine having the healing pods that the Saiyans and Frieza's soldiers could use. This would accelerate it greatly, and let them grow a lot faster after battle. They'd also become aware of ki attacks. At first, they'd probably use energy weapons like weaker Frieza soldiers, or not even rely on that, maybe just preferring their usual combat. But eventually the best warriors would adapt and develop energy blasts, seeing how helpful they are. Since we're assuming they're in the same verse here, ki will be something that can be harnessed by them. And with how great they already are as warriors, they probably have some latent ki within there. As they fight more and more, and heal faster, they grow stronger and stronger. It doesn't seem to help them grow as rapidly as Saiyans, but it's still growth. And once they get ki, their abilities skyrocket even further. Over time, the Viltrumites will get too strong. They're smart though, and they're likely going to keep a low profile, just to not show Frieza their true power. If anything, I feel like the three Saiyans will become allies to them. They went through similar things with Frieza, and they're pretty similar species too. Vegeta might even warn the Viltrumites of what's to come. This is where things ramp up. Vegeta doesn't care for the Viltrumites, but he would respect them as warriors, and also, they could make for useful allies in the meantime. They'll overthrow Frieza together. That's the plan. Perhaps Vegeta can even go to Earth and retrieve Raditz's brother, but he's a weakling, so maybe that's not necessary. The Viltrumites and the three Saiyans form a loose alliance, training, growing, and hiding their power. But just because they're working alongside each other, doesn't mean Vegeta will view them as equals. He still will want to remain above them, so he, Nappa, and Raditz will do everything they can to stay ahead. Eventually it reaches a tipping point, and there are two outcomes here. One, they attack Frieza in his first form, unaware of his other powers. Or two, they wait a really long time and grow really far. ensuring victory no matter what. In the first scenario, they could overthrow Frieza's army and form a joint Saiyan Viltrumite alliance, but there's two big issues there, besides Frieza himself. The Ginyu Force and King Cold could still attack. Now, if they're strong enough to fight First Form Frieza, the Ginyu Force wouldn't be too much of a problem. Though if their entire collective power is needed to kill Frieza, the Ginyu Force would be an issue. But if they're a lot stronger on average, then that doesn't really matter. King Cold is still a problem though too, essentially another Frieza, even if he's not the same strength as Frieza's full power. And that's another thing. Frieza would still be hiding his full power. If they somehow catch Frieza off guard and kill him in his first form, that's great, but they're still King Cold. Plus, if they don't destroy Frieza completely, he can be rebuilt. The chances for total victory in this scenario are pretty low, especially because they might not even be able to kill Frieza right away. If he transforms, which is pretty likely, then they're screwed. But let's say they bide their time for a while, growing so strong together that even if they fight Frieza at his full power, they could overcome him. Despite not knowing the extent of Frieza's power, let's say they grow until their powers are in the millions. They want to be extra sure they can win. 50 Viltrumites plus 3 Saiyans that can go Grade Ape would be more than enough to kill Frieza, as long as their own power levels are in the millions. Let's say they train and grow until they're around 3 million each, making for a collective 150 million power level for the Viltrumites and a 90 million power level for the 3 Saiyans after they go Grade Ape, or 9 million in their base. Since the power's collective, it's not a guaranteed victory as Frieza can divide and conquer. But all of their collective power, channeled into one combined attack, could win. Though the time needed to reach a power like this would be pretty long, and I feel like at some point Frieza would get suspicious. Like, no matter how well they hide their powers, it's going to be really hard to keep this under wraps for 53 people, especially 53 people that Frieza already doesn't like too much. Not to mention, an alliance between the Viltrumites and the Saiyans would be very volatile to begin with. In the first scenario where they attack First Form Frieza, victory is very unlikely unless they insta-kill him in his first form. It's a low diff for Frieza if he transforms or when King Cold gets involved. In the second, victory is a lot more attainable, unless they let Frieza go full power, which probably would happen because they would want to have the best combat possible. In that case, it's a very high diff victory for the Saiyan Viltrumite alliance. But what comes next? A civil war. The Saiyans and Viltrumites won't share power. If they do, it'll be short-lived. More variables happen here. On one hand, the 50 Viltrumites outnumber the 3 Saiyans. However, since Saiyans seem to grow much more from training and healing compared to Viltrumites, and grow a lot faster too, these 3 would likely be ahead of the Viltrumites and not equal like I assumed before. So their powers probably wouldn't be even, especially with the Saiyans already being ahead to begin with. Considering we said these Viltrumites would be weaker than the Raditz on average to start with, let's say Vegeta does everything to maintain his power gap between them, a power gap of about 20 times, just as a rough estimate. So, while the Viltrumites are 1 million power in each, Vegeta would be more like 20 million, rather than equal. In Grade 8, 200 million. One Vegeta could take on about 20 Viltrumites, and transformed, he no-diffs them. Plus, a war could trigger an awakening for Vegeta. Here's how I see it going. The Viltrumites try and divide and conquer, jumping Nappa and Raditz. They're attacked by groups of Viltrumites, and the Viltrumites prevent them from going Grade 8, killing them with high difficulty. Then Vegeta's targeted. They know to not fight near a moon or let Vegeta make one. Pushed to the brink, and with Raditz and Nappa already defeated, plus Vegeta having already been on edge for so long, that could all make the perfect storm for Vegeta to go Super Saiyan, especially with all the extra training he's done. In this form, he would defeat the Viltrumites with ease. Even if the power gap is smaller, and even if they're all equal in power, Vegeta would win if he goes Super Saiyan. Super Saiyan makes him exactly 50 times stronger. So if Vegeta's base is equal to the average Viltrumite, going Super Saiyan would exactly let him match 50 Viltrumites at once. And that's their collective power, so it's going to make it even easier to kill them, since he could also divide and conquer. Though, if it ever gets to this point of a civil war, I feel like that scenario I outlined is the most likely. But if the 3 Saiyans fought together, I think the Saiyans could still take it with mid-difficulty. Though there is a chance the Viltrumites come out victorious, it's just not as high as the Saiyans becoming victorious. Either way, my view is that, at the end of everything, either everyone dies and Frieza remains in power, or the second likely option is that all the Viltrumites die, and maybe even Raditz and Nappa, but Vegeta remains in power, standing above everyone victorious as the last survivor. But what do you think? Do you think the Viltrumites have a better shot? Do you think they'd be more insignificant? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And I know the video involves power scaling, so please be civil when discussing. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on my next video.